Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Evening, I don't know where you are. It's about 6 a.m. for me. It's completely dark, so I haven't done one of these for a while. Just the shortest of preambles first. We're going to be talking a lot about plastics today. Our normal format of diving deep into a particular company who's doing a particular thing in the space isn't exactly as applies, but this is a topic that has come up a few times on the show in the last 6 years. And for me, this is always about trying to understand the system at large and then understand what innovations take place in the system. And so today we're going to be talking all about plastic and trying to elevate to understand plastics at a more scientific, detailed and nuanced level. Now, I come into this knowing a cursory amount about the industry, about plastics and around how they impact the environment, how they're made, everything else. So I'm going to try to be as not just open-minded, but also as interested in asking the questions to try to understand the nuance. And I think people often don't choose to do that. So I would suggest to you, if you're listening as well, to be minded, be curious, be open-minded, and just what the dialogue's going to be about. So with that preamble out of the way, we're going to be talking today to Chris DeArmitt from the Plastics Research Council. Firstly, as we always do, welcome to the show, and just tell us a little bit about how you came to be working on this challenge in this space.
Yeah. People often don't understand why I'm doing this. They assume that I'm paid or something like that, but it's ironic that I'm working on a topic that I'm not actually that interested in myself. It was a funny way that it came about. My daughters walked through the door one day and they'd been told something that wasn't true. And if you do a personality profile on me, like the Big Five, you find out that the number one thing in my profile is fairness. I care about truth and fairness. And so the idea that our kids are being taught things that are not true, disproven by thousands of studies, that made me angry. And so I started fact-checking. We're all told things online, and I believed them all too, until I started checking and comparing what we're being told online to what science says. So that's kind of my history of how I got involved in this. So I devote about 1,000 hours a year to the non-profit, where we all work unpaid. Me and professors from all around the world work unpaid, not a single penny of compensation, to read thousands of studies, and then we share the science verbatim, literally copied and pasted from the studies, so there's no spin on it.
Beautiful. Okay, cool. We're going to get to the studies later. What I want to always do is provide people with enough context so we know what we're talking about. So as odd and as infantile as this might sound, I just want to start with what are plastics? Give us the broadest definition, even down to things like chemical properties and maybe some of the history of plastics as a material in society generally.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And I think you touched upon something very important in your introduction. Everyone that I speak to around the world has their own perspectives on plastic. And so why would we even discuss, right? Everyone knows everything. They've already heard it online. And then I asked my audience, well, how much of what you know now comes from scientists? How many studies have you read? And the answer is none. I've never met anyone in any of my audiences who'd actually read the science themselves. And so then I asked them, well, where does your understanding come from? And they say, the media. And I go, oh, that's interesting. Do you trust the media? And they say, no, I'm not that gullible. And then I say, so fascinating. Everything you know now about plastics comes from a source that you don't trust. Maybe it's time to put that aside for 10 minutes and just consider what scientists say about it, because that might be an eye-opener. So yeah, plastic materials were invented decades ago. I think in the 40s, something like that, they become popular. And people think that plastics are everywhere, but they're actually only 0.5% of materials that we use, 0.5% of materials and waste. So plastics definitely are everywhere, but it would be an exaggeration to say that they're our number one problem, because they're less than 1% of the total. And they've become popular for a couple of reasons. One is they're very diverse, different chemistries, as you mentioned. So polyethylene has different chemistry to polypropylene, different chemistry to polyethylene terephthalate, which is PET. They all have their own, just like metals, you have copper, steel, brass, ductile iron, stainless steel, gold, silver, platinum. They all have their own twists and different applications, different prices. And it's the same way with plastics. It's important to note that they have been around for 70 years. So there's a lot of hype recently about some sort of new unstudied threat. And that's not really the case. Plastics have been studied to death for 70 years. There's every question you could possibly ask has already been answered in the science. And so, yeah, let's dive into some of the specifics. There's a lot of rumors going around, but it's better to start with things which are scientifically proven and peer reviewed than to just believe everything the media is telling us.
Yeah, and I do want to get to that, but I just at specific chemical level, like there's a reason that there's a blanket term called plastics. Like, what is the commonality at a chemical level? That
Great question. So DNA is a long chain molecule. Collagen is a long chain molecule. RNA is a long chain molecule. Our enzymes, long chain molecules, and that's what polymers are. Polymers are any molecule where you take a bunch of little units and you join them all together and you end up with a much longer molecule. So just the same as cellulose, which is what trees are made of, polymers, plastics are like that. They're just like the organic ones, just like the natural materials like DNA, like cellulose that trees are made of, like proteins that we're made of. These are just synthetic versions of those long chain molecules. And that's what makes them special. And if you think about their properties, and this is literally how I think about it, if you grab, let's say you've got a bowl of rice and you put your hands in it and you lift it up, the rice just falls through your fingers. But if you do the same with spaghetti, it's all stuck together. And that's where the strength of polymers comes from. The chains are not linked together chemically, but they just tangle up. Just like when you got short hair like you and I do, right? You can comb your hair all day long. You'll never get a tangle, right? The comb will never get stuck.
Being generous.
Plastics are the exact opposite. You grow that chain longer and longer and longer until it does tangle up. And that's why when you stretch it, like when you stretch mozzarella, it doesn't just break brittly. Those mozzarella is made of polymers. It's made of long chain molecules. And that's why it's able to stretch like that. So that's what plastics are.
And then just to complete this picture, because we're definitely going to be diving into what's understood and what's misunderstood, probably the right way to phrase these two buckets. But just in terms of, you said that these things are a synthetic version of naturally occurring, of materials and organic materials. But just in terms of this process of how they're made and what they're made from, like they didn't appear in nature by themselves. So we've obviously had some hand in making them appear. So roughly what does that life cycle look like? What materials are being used and how are they then turned into these long form polymers that you talked about?
Yeah, well, that's a whole subject for a book. But basically, if you imagine a small molecule as a paperclip, right? So imagine you start with one paperclip and you join it to another one, and then you join that to another one and another one and another one until you've got like 10,000 of those. That's how polymer chains are made. So you start off with a small molecule and you join a bunch of them together. And there's a couple of ways of doing it. One is where you start with one paperclip and join another one to that one, another one to that one, another one to that one. And that's how polyethylene, polypropylene are made. That's a chain polymerization where you join one after the next. The other way to do it is called a condensation polymerization. And that's where you take a bunch of molecules, they're all single, and then you react them together. So one will join to another one. Maybe that's two now. So you start with a monomer. Mono means one. Then you make a dimer. Yeah. That's where you've joined two together. And then you've got another two joined together somewhere else in your molecular pot. And then another one will join to another one. So you've got two, and another two floating around. And eventually some of these twos meet to make fours. And some of those fours meet to make eights. That's a condensation polymerization. That's how nylon and PET are made. So there's different ways of doing that chemical reaction. But it's very efficient. And you can make long chains in a fraction of a second.
Beautiful. And then the inputs to that are like the constituent parts we're talking about here are hydrogen, carbon. What else is what other?
Yeah, that's a great question.
So this thing?
Yeah, people often say plastics are synthetic and they don't degrade, and it's complete nonsense. Plastics are made of carbon-carbon bonds, the same as DNA, the same as RNA we mentioned, the same as enzymes, the same as trees are made of cellulose. It's the exact same chemistry in these plastics, which are in things which are in nature. So they do degrade and they do biodegrade rapidly. Nature knows how to degrade these materials because they're very similar to natural materials. That's something that's very much misunderstood by people. They think that because it's synthetic, it's like completely alien and different. And it really isn't. There's no property of polymers which is really different to anything natural. Even if you take plastic particles and you compare them to pollen or dirt particles or whatever else, they're no different in terms of their fundamental properties.
Yeah, ultimately things are reducible if you're going down to an atomic level, down to an atom. I want to talk a bit more about that degrading a bit later on. So I hate the term put a pin in it, but I definitely want to come back to it. But just closing out this last little part. So where we're manufacturing plastics, and these are manufactured now on an industrial scale, the inputs tend to be hydrogens and carbons. And I'm avoiding the term hydrocarbons because then people say it's coming from oil. It's coming from elements, hydrogen and carbon. If you get them from oil, that might be how they're sourced. But I just want to understand what that supply chain looks like as well. Like where are the inputs coming from to make plastics? And
Oh, I see. Yeah.
help us understand
So
a bit more about that.
yeah, so they might be liquids, they might be gases, and you're right that the raw materials do come from the fossil fuel industry. But what 99.999% of the public don't understand is that although plastics are made from fossil fuel, if you were to replace them with paper, metal, or glass, that requires 2 times more fossil fuel. So even those are not made from fossil fuel, obviously, but those materials require so much more energy to make that you end up using twice as much fossil fuel to make them by burning it to create heat and energy to make those materials. So people think that because plastics are made of fossil fuel, it's automatically going to reduce fossil fuel usage to get rid of plastics. And that's exactly wrong. It's the exact opposite. You would double fossil fuel usage if you got rid of plastics and replaced them with something else. And here's something else that nobody ever considers. So, if you take a barrel of oil, 85% of that is burned. 45% goes to driving cars. Then you've got airplane fuel. So it's burned, right? It's burned in your car. Nobody cares. 45% of a barrel of oil burned in your car, no problem. Jump on an airplane, burn the oil, another 10 or 15%. Heat your home with oil, gas, nobody cares, another few percent. And it goes on and on and on. 85% is burned. Only 4% is used to make plastic, right? And here's the funny thing. If you read these environmental groups, like, all the common ones that everyone knows, they're always claiming plastics are bad because they use fossil fuel, but they only use 4%. But they do a trick of mathematics. They only tell you how much fossil fuel is used to make plastics, and they never tell you, they forget to tell you how much fossil fuel is saved by using plastic. What do I mean by that? Well, plastics make your car far, far lighter, right? So if you were to don't forget, 45% of fossil fuels used to drive your car. If you make your car 10% lighter, now you've saved 4.5% of that barrel of oil, when only 4% of it went to make plastic in the first place. So plastic is actually net fossil fuel and carbon dioxide negative, because they make cars lighter, they make airplanes lighter, they reduce food waste, and they also insulate your homes, your buildings, so you don't have to spend as much fossil fuel to heat them. So the environmental groups always conveniently forget the positives and only ever tell you about the negatives. So they kind of cheat on the mathematics by claiming that, they use fossil fuel, but conveniently forgetting, because it suits their narrative, to ever tell you that they save fossil fuel.
Yeah, and which probably comes back to one of the questions that I had, which was intentionally provocative. And I thought about it this morning. I thought, do I say that or do I not say that? But I think it's a good segue into the bigger conversation here, which is one of nuance, which we're starting to get into anyway. Before we get into that question, though, and it's the next question up after, I just want to understand something that you've touched on a little bit, which is not ignoring, but parking the science for 1 second. What is the appeal of plastics? What is it about them that makes them so widespread and so useful at any level, material and economic or availability, or what are the things?
Well, first of all, on a matter of principle, I try to never talk about the benefits of plastics unless somebody really asks me directly, like you do, because it feels so cheap and cheesy. And I don't make, sell, or market plastics. I don't care if people buy plastics or not. It feels really cheap to me when the plastics industry stands up and says plastics are so good and they save lives. It's saving lives. The incubators, the blood bag that saved your wife's life during childbirth, the oxygen mask, all of the implants that go into your hip joints and pacemakers and all of that stuff. So I never talk about that. In fact, people have to beg me to talk about it because it feels so dirty to
let me make sure I phrased the question correctly then, because
but I will do it. I will answer it. But the benefits of plastic, because you've asked me directly, are they're incredibly versatile. So they can do so many things, and so cheaply. That's the problem. Plastics are so cheap that people don't mind dropping on the floor. So paper as well. So plastics are appealing because they can be molded into many shapes. They're extremely versatile and they're incredibly inexpensive. So if you want to replace 1 pound of plastic or 1 kilo of plastic, on average, you need 3 or 4 kilos of paper, metal, or glass. So it's so efficient in terms of materials usage. That's another advantage of it. It saves a lot of weight and materials. So that's why plastic has become as popular as it is.
Got it. So if we had to look at that, maybe it's a triangle or maybe it's a square, you're looking at a material that has to perform a function. Now that function has a benefit, right? So the benefit of the blood bag, as to use your example, is clear. It allows someone to save a life because they can contain some plasma or a material. But the reason why plastic is chosen over paper or some sort of composite or some sort of metal or glass is that it is easy to form, it is highly available, it is inexpensive, and it is durable enough to perform the task in the context for which it's applied. So it wins on all, and it's very light as well. So you can have a box full of bags, and you can have 100 in there as opposed to 4. And it's compressible as well. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's appealing to use plastic to solve a problem in everyday life that are hard to ignore. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, in fact, somebody calculated, I know a company that sells paper and plastic bags, and they said that if they send out a lorry full of plastic bags, they would need to send 7 lorries to have the same number of paper bags. And they're selling both, right?
Okay.
They don't care. They've got both. They've got no skin in the game. They'll sell you either one, but it takes 7 lorries to carry the same number of paper bags as to carry one truckload of plastic bags. And here's something that will blow your mind. As we talked about cost and efficiency, if you look at how much environmental impact it takes to make a kilogram of gold, you create 25,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide to make 1 kilogram of gold. It's incredibly hideous for the environment, and it's incredibly expensive for the same reason that it's bad for the environment. It takes so much energy, you need to burn so much heat, you need to have so much waste. You get a tiny amount of gold out of a huge amount of mining. Australia knows more about that than most countries do. A lot of good stuff coming from your Perth mint, and with all those little kangaroos and koalas and so forth on, and kookaburras.
Very obscure knowledge, Chris, but I'll get you.
Exactly. So hideous for the environment, but incredibly expensive. And on the other end of that scale, it's almost a straight line, environmental harm and cost. On the other end of that scale are things like paper and plastic, which are incredibly cheap and incredibly low impact. They only take like 1 or 2 kilograms of CO2 to make 1 kilogram of plastic or paper. Unlike gold, which takes 25,000, or platinum, which takes 15,000, or silver that takes 5,000. So this is the problem with plastic. It's so cheap that people don't mind dropping it on the floor. But the trouble is that people will try and convince you, well, the answer is to go to aluminium or glass or something, and that's not the right answer. Spending more to massively increase environmental impact is a really dumb idea. That's not a solution, right? The answer is stop dropping your stuff on the floor, not to move to gold and aluminium and copper and things which have a hugely higher impact. So that's kind of a misconception.
Yeah, okay, understand. And I'll come back to my provocative question, although we've touched in a few parts of it. And this is a general opening for all of the type of misconceptions. We've started to talk about the impact of these materials in terms of the environmental impact, but I want to talk about some of the other impacts and misconceptions as well. But just staying on the environmental one for the moment. And I'm going to come back to your first point about the media and what people see and who they trust and what they believe as a result. So the provocative question is, when we see photos or videos of like a waterway clogged up with plastic or some big swirl out in the ocean, what's the nuance that's missing from that picture? Because that's what they're seeing, therefore that's what they're believing. What's the nuance here? Yeah.
Well, let me give you an idea. So have you ever seen one of those pictures with a turtle with a bag around its neck or eating a plastic bag?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
so the BBC,
with a straw up its nose.
The BBC published one of those, and I said, this is a photoshopped image that's never happened in the history of the world. Please remove that image. It's misleading. And they did. They apologized, removed the image, and put up a more realistic image. So you have to realize that these pictures you see of a turtle with a bag around its neck, that has never happened in the history of the universe. That's just a lie. But that's what our children are seeing. That's what our policymakers are seeing. That's what these so-called environmental groups put up and say, donate now. They've got a big juicy donate now button next to a photoshopped image of a lie, something that's just absolutely categorically untrue. And that's what makes my blood boil. I don't give a monkeys if people buy plastic or not, but I do care that our kids are being shown lies and acting on them. Because it provokes a sense of outrage when you see things like that, but it's unjust outrage because it never happened. And just let me give you an idea. So a ship, there's an experiment that's been running since 1950, where ships go around with a small net. It's called a krill net, and they want to know how much plankton is in the I think it's a plankton net. They want to know how much plankton is in the ocean. So they've been monitoring it continuously since the 1950s. And every time they get a piece of plastic bag stuck in that net, they have to stop the ship and take a note in the ship's log and unclog their net, right, so it can do its job properly. So we have an unusually long history of these measurements. Guess how long this ship with, let's say, a 1 meter net has to sail to find a piece of plastic bag in the ocean?
400 miles.
100,000 miles. That's 4 times around the planet to find one piece of plastic bag. And we're being told that they're choking the turtles. It's just an outrageous lie. And we're told that there's a floating island the size of Texas, and yet there's not a single picture of it anywhere. You can't find a satellite image of it, right? You can see your car in the driveway right now on Google Maps, right? You can look in Google Earth and you can see your car in the driveway right now. You can see the chimney on the top of your house. You can see your son standing in the driveway. Why can't you see this floating island the size of Texas? Because it's not there. It never was there. They made it up. So this is the size of whopper these people are prepared to tell to get donations and mislead us.
Okay. I want to, and not just, I'm trying to look at this more at a macro level and at a personal lived experience level. I'm in Cambodia last year, in rural Cambodia at the beach, and I go to a beach that is a tourist beach, and the beach is littered with plastic. Now, there's other flotsam and jetsam on that beach. It's not just plastic, but there is a lot of plastic there, and there's a lot of plastic just in waste generally. And I look at that, and my first thought is, oh my God, plastic's such a problem. What's the nuance I'm missing with that lived experience? Because that's not a photo, that's not Photoshop, that's something I've seen. And I know that's not me. I'm not the only person who's ever had that experience, especially in the developing world. What am I missing? Or what is everyone missing?
Well, the good thing is that scientists have studied all this stuff for decades. So they looked at what's on tourist beaches and what's on isolated beaches that tourists can't get to, and they compared the two. So on a tourist beach, as you mentioned, you find a lot of plastic stuff and a couple of fishing nets. And paper and wooden skewers and things. It depends on the region.
Old bikes.
But they analysed that litter and found out that they literally scientifically proven, and these studies are cited in my book and quoted verbatim in both of my books, they literally prove that the litter on the beach comes from the people on the beach. It's a scientific fact that those people drop the litter, and here's the funny thing with human nature. They drop litter until it looks so disgusting that the beach is awful and not beautiful anymore, and then they move to a next beautiful beach and litter that one and mess it up. So the solutions to litter, and this is the funny thing, once you have the facts, right, that it's litterers cause litter, I mean, every kid knows that. I mean, blaming you, I sometimes in my talks, I take my own book, right, I throw it on the stage and say, who blames the publisher for that? Who blames the paper industry for that act that I just did? Not a single one puts their hands up, right? They know that the litterer is responsible for litter, and yet somehow when it's on the beach, they're like, oh my God, the plastics industry's caused this, or Coca-Cola's to blame. They literally have lawsuits that get thrown out of court where people try and blame the manufacturer for the litter that they dropped. And the scientists study this in detail. They don't drop it by accident. They literally, 81% of litter was dropped intentionally, and these clowns turn around and blame the litter that they just dropped because they can't look in the mirror and blame themselves. And so the solutions to litter, scientific solutions, are education, deposits, and fines. And now let's talk about what's on remote beaches. Almost no plastic whatsoever, and you find a couple of fishing nets. So people think that this litter that they see on the beach is coming up from the sea, and it isn't. It's coming from the people who dropped it on the beach.
Yeah, interesting. And that's what I had understood, because you intuitively think this, if you take a step back. I don't have any of the data, right? That you've got the data is useful. And there's going to be, just as a side note for anyone listening, we're going to have a bunch of, I would want to have a few references to some of the key things that we've spoken about here. So if people want to go and look this up for themselves, they can. So hold on to that. The sorters will come if Chris can furnish the big ones. There's obviously 5,000. We're not going to be looking for all of them. Or go and read the book. But like, I live in Australia, and Australia is has more beaches than any other country or continent in the world, is my understanding, or country.
And poisonous spiders as well.
We have all of them, actually. We have all the poisonous spiders and drop bears. But anyway, we can talk about those on a separate show. The point I was going to make is that if you go to any beach in Australia, very rarely do you see it awash with litter, which makes no sense. You would think there's 27 million people here. We all eat stuff and consume stuff. What's different? What you're saying checks out. And I had a sense that it was something to do with the logistics around it. Just as a related question, though, you talked about kind of the right things being policy and fines and education.
Yeah.
Where does the industry that takes plastic and does something with it fit into the equation? And what does good look like with regards to taking plastic and taking it out of the environment if it has been littered, or reusing it or recycling it? What's the science say about what's good in that regard?
Okay. Well, that's a complicated topic. So first of all, people assume that there's a relationship between recycling and litter, and there isn't. Nobody walks down the road, thinks about dropping a can and goes, oh, that could be recycled. I'll just keep it in my hand and take it home. It doesn't happen. People drop litter, has no correlation whatsoever to recycling. Although that's being pushed on us. They're telling us we need extended producer responsibility, we need collection, we need recycling to solve litter, and there's no evidence that that works whatsoever. Another reason that we're focusing on recycling is that if you look at impact of different materials, the only way to do that is to look at a life cycle analysis, and you look at energy, waste, recycling, total impact through the life of the thing. It's a scientific way of comparing impact. Plastic wins in 93% of cases. The only thing where it doesn't win is recycling rate. Paper, metal, and glass are recycled at a higher rate than plastic, although they're worse for the environment. So what do those industries do? When they've lost, there's 10 things you can measure, and they win on one of them. What do? They focus on the one where they win. So that's why we see a lot of talk in the media about the importance of recycling rate and extended producer responsibility, because that's what the metal, glass, and paper industry want us to focus on. It's the only thing where they're ahead. Plastic wins on energy use and litter and waste and effect on water and almost anything you can measure. Greenhouse gas, fossil fuel usage.
But the thing that I really want to understand is, if you have a piece of plastic and you no longer need it because you've done the transfer of plasma, to use the hospital example from earlier, what is the right way for that bit of plastic to either be reused, returned, recycled? What should a society do with this plastic after it's been used? That's the question I'm asking.
All right. Sorry. So yeah, the first thing to say about that is it would be fine to just bury it. There's nothing wrong with landfill. It's worked since the Roman times and before that. And so people seem to automatically think that that's a bad idea, and it's actually fine. Plastic reduces waste to landfill. That's been scientifically proven, because 1 pound of plastic reduces 3 or 4 pounds of other material. So plastic has been scientifically proven to reduce waste to landfill. However, another thing you can do, which is totally fine, is to burn it. Because plastic has the same energy content as oil or gas, right? So it's the same. So if you have a barrel of oil, you can either burn 85% of it, which we do, or you can use some of it to make plastic, use it for 10 years, 20 years to make a car, to make an airplane, to make a park bench, to make a water pipe that brings water to your house. And then at the end of that life, you can still burn it and get the same energy out. So that's also fine. The other thing you can do is mechanically recycle it. And that's where you collect it, clean it, and you grind it up in a thing a bit like a coffee grinder to make little pieces. And then you just melt it and make a new part out of it, a new water pipe or a new park bench or a new PET bottle or whatever. And that works just fine. That does work. So here's the amazing thing people don't understand. Plastic has the lowest impact in 93% of applications studied, even without recycling, even with low or no recycling. So people think we need recycling to make plastic green. That's not the case. It already has the lowest impact. But if you do recycle it, you further reduce the impact by 70%.
Right. So in some respects, it lives in... I want to talk about how it degrades in a second, because I think that's something that goes into people's heads, and there's a whole segment of what we're going to talk about, which is microplastics. So I just want to park that for the moment.
Sure.
But just in terms of the idea that if you have a piece of plastic, and this is something, interestingly, we had a gentleman on the show a few years ago, I'm just trying to remember his surname, but he came from a company called ZeroCo, and what he basically said, and sorry, to give you the context, his company was building a system through household goods, like the spray and wipe that you use for your table or your hand soap, whatever, where he said you should just hold on to the bottle and we'll just send you more and more of the stuff to put in the bottle, because plastic is an amazing material as long as you don't just use it once and throw it away. Now, you might say, well, that even if you do use it once and throw it away, it's still better than having to put it in glass or put it in metal. Yes. But his point was the material properties of the fact that it is very durable and reusable actually make it really good for certain applications when that's actually what you want. So I just wanted to kind of understand, from your perspective, when you think about plastics used in society generally, there's those where you use it and you need it for a period of time, like in a plane, like in a car, like in a park bench, and it's incredibly durable in that context. And there's the other context where it's used very lightly. The point here is even if you've got something single use, for example, and all you end up doing is burying it in the ground, that's still a better outcome than the alternative.
Yes. So the only real way, so I can't answer that question with a yes or no because it's quite complicated. The only way to know what causes more impact or less is a life cycle analysis. So no one person can stand there and say that there's a blanket answer that recycling is best. It's not always best. Reuse is best. It's not always best. This idea, people are worshipping a god of circularity. And if you look at the science, circular actually does save the environment in about half of cases, and in the other half, it makes things worse. So let me show you an example, because people think that single use is a bad thing necessarily, and it isn't. So if you look at life cycle studies, the greenest water, the lowest impact water, is tap water. The next lowest impact is PET single-use bottled water. And now if you want to go for reusables, right, you would have to add more PET to that bottle to make it reusable again and again, right? It's a thicker wall now with more plastic. That is the next greenest. Because durable things have to be thicker and more substantial. So you need more material to make them. So there's a trade-off there, and they're not always a win for the environment. So, and then the next ones are metal and glass reusable, which are just hideous for the environment compared to even the reusable plastic or the tap water or the single-use plastic. Another example is plastic bags. There's 30 studies on those. The lowest impact is the single-use polyethylene bag. In theory, the thicker polypropylene bags, like you get the blue ones at IKEA, those will be greener in theory. But what actually happens, because people have tried this experiment, those are thicker. People leave them at home and leave them in their cupboard. They end up with a cupboard full of bags that they forgot at home. And so you end up selling more plastic and increasing impact. And so
literally everyone.
Yeah, so that's the case. I'm here to tell you that if you're offered a straw, just say no to the straw. And if you do take one, take a plastic one and reuse it as many times as you can. You can reuse a plastic single-use straw 50 or 100 times. People have done it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting idea, because I think and I get your point about the circularity and the idea of one size doesn't fit all. But if there's a phrase that's borrowed from the idea of circularity that talks firstly about reduce.
Yeah.
Right. And then reuse. Like, those are the first two things.
Right.
Don't use as much, and if you do have a thing, reuse it. Yeah. And then the downstream is, if it makes sense, then recycling may be the best thing, but in some cases, just simply burying it or burning it might be the best thing. We talked a little bit about the burning. It's essentially just another form of, hydrocarbon that can be burnt for energy. The real lift would be to not burn 85% of a barrel of oil.
Right.
If we electrify all of our cars and all that things, we will be a lot less worried about burning the 4% of plastic that we use. Help me understand, and it's just getting a little bit into the kind of microplastics topic that we haven't touched on yet. What happens when you bury it? What is the scientific reality of microplastics in the environment, in our bodies, in the waterways? What's actually happening there, and what's true and what's not?
Yeah. Well, I've read 1,000 studies on that, so you're talking to the right person. Unpaid took me 7 years. And I want to point out to your listeners, I think this is one guy with a contrarian opinion. I've written 2 books on this over the time, and they're free. And professors and toxicologists and medical doctors all around the world have endorsed and checked these findings of mine, and no one's ever found an error. They literally sign their name, their accreditation, not even people from the plastics industry. These are people from other industries who've checked this science backwards and forwards for 7 years and never found anything wrong with it. So anyway, yeah, like all solids degrade, even if, I don't know if you're wearing a wedding ring, even your wedding ring is losing gold all the time. There's a guy who measured the weight of his wedding ring. I mean, a bit of a nutter, right? He put it onto a really accurate balance and measured it. And he noticed that the worst thing for his wedding ring was going to the beach because of all the abrasion. So every solid, including concrete and wood and plants and cotton that we're wearing, everything creates particles. So the questions we have to ask ourselves is, so plastic is definitely not unique there. How much of these particles in dust, right? We just call it dust, right? Everything else we call dust and we don't care about it. So ask yourself now, how much do you lie awake at night worrying about dust? You've never given it a second thought, have you?
Sure.
Well, we've breathed.
But also, just before you jump into that point, I also don't want to inhale dust into my lungs.
Right. Well, we'll inhale about 1 million dust particles each during this interview, right?
Right. Okay.
And nobody gives a monkeys, right? So now we have to ask ourselves, how much of that is plastic? And the answer is plastic is 0.001% of the dust that we consume in our lives. In 70 years, we will consume 0.015 grams. So the World Wildlife Fund tells us that we eat a credit card a week of microplastic. Science says that would take 20,000 years to do, right? Not one study, several studies where people have said that is just total nonsense, right? So people are being told outrageous nonsense with a big donate now button, right? And they don't correct it on their website either. They leave up the nonsense because, it generates money, one presumes. So it's it's 100,000th of the dust you already don't care about, right? Just to give you some perspective. And now your next question will be, well, that wouldn't matter if it was a small amount, if it was toxic. And the thing is, people think this is like a new, unstudied, threat. We have 2,000 studies on plastic particles over 60 years, and there's not a single study in the history of the world saying that plastic particles cause any health effect whatsoever at real doses. Never been documented. So to compare, I just said we eat 0.015 grams over 70 years. How much would be the safe dose? And the answer is a coffee cupful every day. That's the NOAEL. That's the no observable adverse effect level. 1 cup a day compared to 0.0. That's 70 grams a day compared to a fraction of a gram over 70 years.
As in like just eating it and outputting it.
Our ingestion of plastic is 100 million times below the safe level.
Right. Oh, wait, let me just make sure I understand your point. If someone's drinking a cup of plastic and it's just floating through their body, a lot of it will go back out at the end of the day.
It goes right through you, just like every other solid particle does.
Yeah. And
no effect. Same with fish, same with cats, same with dogs, same with animals, same with everything. It's been studied.
And so if you've got, let's say you're not doing that, but you've got plastic that you're, whatever, you've got a water bottle that has some plastic, some of that dust, as to use your term, has come off and come in. And so if it gets into, or when it gets into your system, not your digestive system, but blood system or nervous system, whatever, then is there science around the lack of impact of that? That's actually, I guess, the part where it's actually in your body as opposed to in your system.
Yeah. So they've studied that. And again, plastic is not unique. So the first study that showed particles getting into your blood and going around your body was done on dogs in the year 1844 on starch particles. Yeah. And I found that old study. So we've known that particles go in all kind of dust particles. A very, very small percentage of the really, really small ones go inside you. And it's been known for almost 200 years. That's what people don't understand. People are trying to scare us about plastic, but they do the exact same thing as all the other 100,000 times more other particles do. And there's no health effects whatsoever because our body is designed for that, right? You've got macrophages, you've got blood cells that can grab red blood cells, white blood cells that can grab hold of these things and expel them from the body and deal with them. That's all part of, nature has got defenses for exposure to, because we're breathing 1 million particles an hour. So our body's set up for that.
And when it comes to the conversation, to be honest, look, I'm 48 in about 3 weeks. And in the time where I grew up, there was no mention of microplastics. There was concern about plastic from an environmental perspective, but only the health perspective as a concern more recently. But do you know what changed? Like, how did this become a topic du jour? Like, what's going on there?
Well, there's a couple of things. So one is scientists did a study where they compared what the media are telling us to what science says. 93% of media articles say that microplastics are a definite threat. And a tiny minority of plastics studies claim that it might be a threat. So we know for a fact that the media have lied to us. It's a scientific fact that we've been misled. And part of that's driven by, there's some billionaires around the world. There's a couple of famous ones in Australia called the Forests. And they created, funded and founded Minderoo, which is it's a non-profit that they paid for. So they're from the steel industry, right? They became billionaires. They were just fined 100 million for mining on land that wasn't theirs. They didn't have permission. Right? That was like a couple of weeks ago. So these are obviously the absolutely top, most respected people in the world. And they've created a non-profit as iron and steel billionaires that spends their time attacking the plastics industry. How very convenient for them, right? I mean, I can't say that was their motive, but it sure looks suspicious to have an iron and steel billion, because if you look at the impact of the iron and steel industry, it's much, much higher than the plastic industry is. So how convenient to create a non-profit and fund it and have them spend their time going around attacking your competitor, saying things that just don't add up when you check the science. So that's another aspect. There's a bunch of, and they're not the only ones. There's a guy called Michael Bloomberg in the US who's funded a thing called Beyond Plastics, which just goes around making outlandish claims about plastics because he's against plastics. So, and the thing is, no one should really be for or against plastics. You should be for or against the truth. You should be caring about what does the evidence say, and then make whatever decision you please once you know the facts. But don't start off with a bunch of baloney and then make decisions on that.
Yeah, well, essentially, if I play your answer back, it's vested interest. It's always vested interest. It's why we have the version of the truth that we have. And like, I have got
the irony is these people are getting
that,
rich telling lies, and I'm not talking about these people I just mentioned, but in general, environmental groups are getting rich telling just whoppers, and I'm getting poor telling the truth. I mean, I'm here in my spare time, spending 1,000 hours a year reading science, which is really dead boring, to find the truth and share it verbatim online in free books on the free websites, and having other professors check it and everything. I mean, imagine the stuff I was saying was nonsense. I wouldn't be sending it to professors around the world saying, here, double check this, it's a load of crap, It's, people, it would be embarrassing.
Do you think, though, I haven't had anything to do with the forests. They're incredibly well known. I grew up in Perth, where they're based and where they're from, and I'm very familiar with Fortescue, which is the mining company you're referring to, and Findaroo Foundation, sorry. And you observe about the forests as an example. It appears, at least, that they're trying to do the right thing. They're one of the few mining companies in Australia that is trying to, hear me out, electrify their fleet of mining things, right? So they've got a separate division that's building wind farms. Now, again, you can debate the economics of that and the environmental impact of that. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is maybe, and not to give them the benefit of the doubt, but to make the point more generally, that they might be coming from a place of misinformation as well.
They could be. Because I couldn't understand, why is it that a group of billionaires, Bill Gates has got the Gates Foundation, he's at it as well. So I couldn't understand it for years. My audiences all around the world would say, well, why are these people funding this stuff that's just completely nonsense? And so I asked ChatGPT, why are billionaires funding plastic industry attacks? And it said, oh, it's very easy. This is the way they see it. They see plastics made from fossil fuel. Fossil fuel means global warming. Therefore, we need to get rid of plastics. And this is like 5-year-old thinking, right? I mean, because as I just pointed out to you, plastic is a tiny fraction of fossil fuel, and being against plastic means going to paper, metal, and glass and doubling your fossil fuel usage. So I like to joke to my audiences, I hope that I'm so rich someday that I can spend $100 million fighting against my own wishes. These millionaires are literally against plastic because they think it's fossil fuel, and the effect of their actions is to massively increase fossil fuel usage because they didn't do their homework. And presumably, I mean, they've got infinite resources, these people. They've got thousands of employees. They could have somebody go off and spend 30 seconds on Google and check to see whether what they're campaigning for actually helps or harms.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, and this is just conjecture, obviously, I don't have good data for this, but if you paint forward a picture where either fusion or electrification leads to a massive drop in the usage of oil and natural gas, the argument that it's only 4% of our usage starts to fall down. And if you're using, if the energy system changes, or some of the arguments about how plastic is made and the efficiency of plastic may also change as a result. And so maybe that part where it's just going.
Yes and no. So first of all, the percentage argument doesn't make sense. So this is what some of the green groups are doing this. They're saying, imagine we stopped burning all the oil. Now the percentage of plastic that's using oil used to make plastic would go up. I'm like, what a rubbish argument, right? It doesn't mean that the amount is going up. It just means the percentage is going up because you remove the rest of the pie chart, right? So that doesn't actually make sense. If you talk to people who are real experts, there's a guy called Paul Martin on LinkedIn. You should get him in as a guest. He's the #1 expert on hydrogen and all of that nonsense. And this stuff where you suck carbon dioxide out of the air completely doesn't work. It's just a giant taxpayer ripoff. So he's an expert on that. And he said, any logical person would say, let's stop burning, as you said earlier, 85% of oil, and what we should do is save the oil we do have for chemicals, medicines, and plastics. That's what it's useful for. Right. However, most people don't realize you can buy plastic today that's not made from fossil fuel. You don't need to make it from fossil fuel. You can make it from plants, no problem. It's already available on the market right now if you want to go and buy it.
And I want to get to that as well, because I think there's a past, present and future state.
Yes.
Kind of one of my kind of outward looking questions, but I will get to it. Before we get into that, and kind of just to round this out a little bit, and I'm reminded of an interview, which I'm not going to directly quote, but it was an interview with Ali G, who you're probably familiar with.
Yeah.
And the question he asked, and I won't even talk about the context, is, and what are the negative side effects? I'm curious to understand.
Yes, I remember the exact thing you're talking about.
You do remember the interview?
Yeah.
incredibly good. I want to understand, to make sure this is balanced, like, what are the problems with plastic? Like, what are its shortcomings? We're painting a picture that gives it some breathing room and some light and looks at it differently. What are the shortcomings?
Well, ironically, one of the shortcomings is that they degrade too quickly. So one of my areas, and I've published actual science on this, people don't realize that without stabilizers, without a small amount of additive, you know how you cut an apple and it goes brown right away and you have to put lemon juice on to stop it from doing it? It's the same with plastic. Some plastics that we use today are so unstable that they have to put stabilizer in before they even take it out of the factory. That's how it's like an apple going bad in front of your eyeballs. So that's what makes me laugh when people say plastics don't degrade. Half of them are so unstable that you can't even use them without stabilizers. PVC, for example, completely useless without stabilizers. Polypropylene, completely useless without stabilizers. Between them, they've got 30% of the plastics market. So 30% of the plastics, and even polyethylene is unstable. You need to put stabilizer in it. So it's the exact opposite with plastic. It's very unstable, many of them. Not all of them, but many of them, of the common ones, are so unstable. And what you do is you put in just the right amount of stabilizer to make it last as long as you want. So if you make a plastic bag, you put in a tiny amount of stabilizer to make it last, a little while in the supermarket and so forth. And if you leave that outside on the ground, it degrades at about the same rate as a paper bag. It's gone in less than a year. That's been done. That's peer-reviewed science. So World Wildlife Fund and Ellen MacArthur and Greenpeace and all of these other ones, they tell you a bag will take 450 years to degrade. Peer-reviewed science says it takes less than 1 year. Actual measurements, right? So again, a massive discrepancy between what we're being told and the truth. And and on the other hand, you could make a polyethylene pipe to bring safe, clean drinking water to your house, and you can put better and more stabilizers in that and make it last over 100 years. Right? So it's a thicker piece with more and better stabilizer. Now you can choose to make it last 100 years. So the default position with plastic is because they're made of carbon-carbon bonds, they can break down easily, but we can add things in there. And there's whole teams of researchers around the world right now trying to come up with better stabilizers for plastics to make them last even longer when we want them to. That's a big downside of plastic.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess you gave me the shortcoming and the solution. I'm trying to work out, is there things about it that are not as desirable and are better in other materials? And
there are things, yeah. So one of them is that you can't recycle plastics very easily as a mixture. You have to separate them out. So some metals, they'll just melt together and you will end up with something usable. When you melt plastics together, you get drops of one inside the other one, and that gives you bad properties. So a big part of recycling is cleaning and then separating the plastics. If you have polyethylene, let's say, and it's contaminated with even 5% of polypropylene, which is chemically almost the same, that will make the properties much worse. Another thing is that plastics can't be recycled. Nothing can be recycled infinitely. Anyone who tells you glass or aluminium can is just not telling you the truth. There's plenty of losses. You can read about it online. You can check it yourself. Nothing's infinitely recyclable. But plastic can be recycled, let's say, 10 or 20 or 30 times realistically. Whereas metals, you could probably do it more. But the thing is, as I said, you don't want to move to them because they're hideous for the environment. So it's like two wrongs don't make a right, right? Repeating something that was a bad idea in the first place doesn't make it a great solution.
Yeah, my guess is when you reuse aluminium, like if I feel like I'm post-war baby boomer, but when I use aluminium now in the house, as in like a sheet of aluminum or whatever they call it in the US, I take it and fold it up and put it back in the cupboard and get 3 or 4 uses out of it. Oh, cool. Because I'm like, there's nothing wrong with it. I literally just put it on top of a piece of meat to keep it hot for while it was cooling or whatever you're supposed to do with aluminium. But at some point as well, like clearly if aluminium is just the element and it's just been rolled into some flat sheet, probably had something else added to it to be able to make it. Sure, it's not 100% aluminium. I'm sure there's other stuff in a roll of aluminium. But in terms of recycling it, at some point, you'd have to remake it even and put energy back into that system to have a roll of aluminium again, presumably.
That's exactly it. When you have to melt these materials, they melt at much, much higher temperatures than plastic. So you need much, much more fossil fuel burn to make that energy. And aluminium, there's a very thin oxide layer. Aluminium is incredibly reactive. It reacts instantly with the air. So there's a thin oxide layer which protects the rest of the aluminium from just bursting into flames. So that's how reactive aluminium is. Have you ever seen magnesium burning underwater? Aluminium's even more reactive than that. So it's only that oxide layer. And then if you go to recycle it, that oxide layer ends up as slag on the top of the aluminium, and that's waste, which you then have to throw away. So anyone who's telling you that aluminium can be remelted and recycled infinitely is clearly not being candid.
Yeah. And you touched a little bit on fillers and additives, and I had it as a standalone question because you talked about increasing the durability and dialing in the durability to what you want. What other roles do fillers and additives play in the utility of and the value and how else can they improve plastic?
Yeah, that's one of my specialist areas there, where I work with companies all around the world to pick the right reinforcements and fillers. So some of them increase just the stiffness. Some of them increase the wear resistance, so you can have less abrasion and make bearings that last for longer, for example. Other ones really increase the stiffness and the strength, like glass fiber and mica. Those are very good reinforcements for most plastics. Make them stiffer, stronger, last longer. You make them lighter, so you need less in your car or whatever. You can reduce the weight of your car even more and make it and reduce the miles per, increase the miles per gallon and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot of different minerals. You can add graphite to make it more lubricious. You can add, it's just infinite number. You can add things to make it more thermally or electrically conductive. All kinds of different additives to make plastics even more versatile.
And it's definitely a long question. I don't need all of the answers, but maybe some examples. You just gave an example of graphite being one of the things that's an additive. What's typically added to it? What is it, specific element, or is it some other polymer, or what's being added?
Typically, there's hardly anything in plastic, so that's a big misunderstanding. People like to claim that there's phthalates or BPA or endocrine disrupting chemicals coming out of plastics, and those are not in the plastics that you use today, right? So if you look at polyethylene, no BPA, no phthalate. Polypropylene, they're not adding phthalate plasticizers to make it softer. It doesn't work. It's not done. Same with BPA, there is none in there. Same with polystyrene, same with expanded polystyrene, which is incredibly low impact because it's 98% air, right? There's hardly any polymer there. That's very green because there's hardly any solid there. The same with polycarbonate, that doesn't have any phthalates, but it can have a tiny, tiny amount of BPA, which is below the safe threshold. So again, this is another example where people are claiming things are coming out of plastic, which are impossible because it was never there in the first place. And I had this argument with a lady from the Washington Post. She was talking about some chemical coming out of PVC, and I said, it's not there. It can't come out. It's not there. How can something come out of a thing that doesn't exist? And she couldn't get it. And I said, well, let me put it this way. Are you worried about lions escaping from, the big cats, lions escaping from your garden? And she said, no, I don't have any lions. And I said, exactly. You're not worried about a lion escaping from your garden because there is no lion in your garden. It's the same with these additives in plastics. They're just not there.
Yeah. And then, but in terms of what materials are used as additives, is my question. I was curious.
Yeah, so calcium carbonate, talc, mica, glass fiber, titanium dioxide for whiteness. You've got graphite for thermal and heat conductivity. You've got metal fibers can be used. There's glass spheres can be used. I've got a whole website about that, and I've written book chapters on it.
I find it fascinating. We interviewed Jason Rowland from over at Carbon 3D, which is a company that's based out of the west coast of the US and make really interesting things, and like the helmets for the NFL players as an example.
Yeah.
And so much of what they're doing is understanding how to change the polymers and work with the material properties of whatever it is that they're producing, not just the design of these things, to make them lighter, stronger, better, faster. And it's overwhelmingly a plastic outcome that they're doing.
Well, you should give me a call. That's one of my expertise areas. Even Apple and companies like that call me. So that's my paid job, is to find the right additives for plastics.
Yeah, fascinating. That also answers one of my questions. I wanted to make sure you were getting paid somehow. We all have to eat.
Talk to my family about that, It's a shame I'm not it's a shame I'm wasting 1,000 hours a year on unpaid work, or I'd be putting more effort into my actual
I don't know. I was thinking about that this morning, to be honest. I think some things need to exist, and we get out of bed every day, and yes, we do things to ensure that we can eat and put a roof over our head and support our children, but some things just need to exist in the world, and it's important that we put our time into those, or at least contribute to them. So
people have got that backwards. They'll say, how can we trust you to talk about plastics? You're a plastics expert. I'm like, well, that's an interesting idea. Do you go to the hospital and insist on the janitor treating you? Because God forbid you should let a medical expert tell you about medicine. It's like, or do you when your car breaks down, do you go to your hairdresser and ask them how to fix your turbo? I hope not, because or you need heart surgery and you ask your car mechanic to do it. I mean, the idea that you can't ask the expert, the only person in the world who has the answers is really stupid. But that's how topsy-turvy the world is today.
It's a delicate balance. I think people who have expertise need to also be critical of their own expertise. They have to be open-minded to, if I read 1,000 reports this year, and 15 of them say something, and all 15 of them arrive at this thing, and it's counted to what I believe previously from another 1,000 from last year, I change my opinion.
Right. That's exactly how I got where I am.
Yeah. Have you ever had to do that? Has there ever been new science that's actually refuted a point for or against a position with regards to this topic?
Well, all the things I've told you about, I had no clue before I started, and I've got no interest in it, as I said. So, for example, there's 30 life cycle studies on bags, plastic bags, grocery bags, paper bags, cotton bags. Everyone ever done in the world says that the polyethylene bag has the lowest impact. So what are we doing? Banning and taxing it. Totally moronic. And then there's 3 post-bag ban studies. There's one in Maine, one in Washington State, and one in New Jersey, where the politicians paid somebody to study and show what a genius they were for banning the bag. Guess what every study said was? Massive increase in impact, just as every life cycle study said would happen, and massive increase in plastics, because the grocery bags are so thin, the shopping bags, so thin in America, you can see through them. They weigh 6 grams. The paper bag weighs 60 grams. So when you ban those very, very thin bags, which people reuse as bin liners, now you have to go to the grocery store and buy actual bin liners, which are 5 times thicker, 5 times more plastic.
Right.
So the net effect of bag bans is to increase cost, increase in harm to the environment, and massively increase sales of plastic. So if I was here as a shill for the plastics industry, I would be telling you ban plastic bags, we'll sell more plastic.
That's fascinating. So I want to get to the last little part of what we're talking about here, which is from here looking forward. And you kind of touched on it earlier, talking about it. You don't have to make a plastic product out of a hydrocarbon that's come from a fossil fuel out of the ground. So I want to talk about this in a broad sense. I want to understand what the latest innovations in plastics are. Why do they matter? And they can be in any part of the life cycle of a bit of plastic.
All right. Well, the first thing I want to do is add some context, because there's a danger when you talk about plastics all the time is you focus in too much on, like putting an insect in the microscope and all you see is those amazing faceted eyes, right? And the whole rest of the world is blocked out. So if somebody wanted to help the environment, the way they can do it has got nothing to do with plastics. The 3 main things you can do is drive less, fly less, and eat less meat. Those are the things that would actually make a difference, not talking about plastics. So to get that, the trouble with those things is they all involve a sacrifice, and nobody wants to make a sacrifice. So they talk about plastic bags and straws all day, which make no difference to anything. So let's get back to your question. The things you can actually do with plastics and things which are innovations are plastics from plant raw materials, better job on recycling, but again, it's not an answer to, it's not a game changer. It's just, it's like the icing on the cake. The cake tastes a bit better with it, but the cake is still nice even without it. Too much focus on that. And basically just getting back to facts, stop banning and taxing things which are the greenest solution according to every study ever done in the world. That's just stupid. Politicians, of course, do it because they need votes, but we should start doing things that make sense, that based on evidence, not just knee-jerk reactions.
Yeah, and I kind of want to, I'm just going to come back to the question specifically though, because I'm interested in plastics, as you said, have been around for decades. That was what you said right up front. And I'm aware of a company that's in WA, where I'm from, that is using kelp to make a plastic, to literally make a plastic that's not made from hydrocarbons, but it still has all the properties of plastic. It's still a long-form polymer, from my understanding. I haven't had them on the show as yet. That's an example of an innovation in plastics regarding the production of plastics. Give me 2 or 3 other innovations that are happening with regards to either using them, reusing them, recycling them, where they're coming from. I want to understand the innovations that are happening in the plastic industry that make this an even better solution for whatever problem we're trying to solve.
All right. Well, first, let me tell you that I'm an innovator. And the thing is, it's very easy to come up with something new, but it's not easy to come up with something that actually makes sense. So the media loves anything new and exciting. There's some just nonsense on the internet. So, for example, the only way to know, for example, there's a company called Notpla, Notpla, and they've done a brilliant job of media marketing. And when you go to their website and look for proof that their innovative plastic reduces impact, I could not find one single piece of evidence. And if they had it, they would have shared it, right? They would have a life cycle study proving that it reduces impact. I could not find any evidence whatsoever. It's the same with PLA, which is polylactic acid. That's a natural plastic that can replace some other plastics. It's not a very good material. It costs more money, and there's no proof that it's better for the environment. The same as PHB and PHA. They're natural, wonderful, lovely, sexy sounding materials that have existed since 1982, and they still make no sense. There's still no evidence that they reduce impact to the environment. And it's the same probably with kelp. Unless that person, they'll go and get $1 million from some millionaire or billionaire to fund their work, but unless they can prove that it reduces impact, it's just a load of nonsense. It's a load of smoke and mirrors and techno babble nonsense, right? And there's a lot of gullible people out there funding this stuff. The things that actually make more sense is you can make polyethylene. That's the standard, cheapest, lowest impact, one of the lowest impact materials in the world. And you can make that from plants. It's the same material, the same applications, indistinguishable, recyclable with regular polyethylene. No safety worries because we have decades of data. Everything's there. Same with polypropylene. You can buy polypropylene made instead of oil from plants, and some of the nylons and so forth. That's what makes more sense than making new polymers, which usually have worse properties and cost more money, and there's no. But even the polypropylene and polyethylene, I don't think I've ever seen a study that shows that the plant-based ones have lower impact than the regular hydrocarbon-based ones, the fossil fuel-based ones.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of nonsense going on in that area.
Yeah. Okay. So from an innovation perspective, though, at the moment, there's people who are trying to create new polymers. There's no science supporting that from your research thus far, but there is opportunities to create plastics that have the same properties and are the same polymers, but have them not come from hydrocarbons if you really want to solve the hydrocarbon fossil fuel sourcing part of the equation, which is not the entire equation, obviously, but that problem is solvable and not out of the realm of science.
And there are innovations in stabilizers, I mentioned. So adding just a few parts per million, a tiniest amount, we're talking about 0.01% or something, or something like that, can make a huge difference, could make a single piece of pipe last 10 years longer, for example, just by changing the tiny fraction of additive. And they're safe as well, these additives, before somebody freaks out about that. You can eat a couple of those a day as well, and nothing happens to you. So the additives that are in polyethylene or polypropylene or PET are totally microscopic amounts of things that are safe and below any kind of safety threshold. Another innovation that people are unaware of is that when you and I were kids, a PET bottle would weigh 25 grams, and now that same bottle weighs 8 grams or 9 grams. So it's 60% less material to make the same product. So there's always innovations going on with how to process things more efficiently, how to reduce the amount of plastic used, and that's going on continuously every year. It's called down gauging. So that's something that's always happening because people save money and it helps the environment too.
Yeah, and I'm also going to be cynical of that one because they say, by the way, the price is the same, but you now get 25% less Powerade or whatever it was that you were trying to buy because the bottle's smaller. Yeah. And I'm sure there's a cynical angle in there somewhere. Just one thing that I was leading to, and I'm curious as to, because you talked about, and I hadn't really considered this in its holistic and useful form, but if you burn the plastic as a form of generating energy or using it to generate heat, whatever you need to use it for, is there anyone who's innovating in and around that part of the stack, which is to say, give me all the plastic and I'm going to burn it all, but I'm going to manage that in a way that allows me to get this material that everyone throws away and turn it into something valuable, heat or energy, but in a way that, is net positive for what would otherwise happen? Is anyone doing that well? That was
good question. So for example, in Sweden, they do that. They burn their plastic, and so now you're not burning coal, right? You've got a coal-fired power station or an oil-fired power station, but instead of using that, you're replacing some of that with plastic. So you've got the same power station, but now you're not burning as much coal or oil or gas because some of the input is plastic. So that works, and Sweden is doing that so efficiently. They're importing waste from other countries, plastic waste, because they can't produce enough of it themselves to keep those burners going, right? So that works. That is done in countries and it works just perfectly. Of course, you have cleaning for the gases that go out, just like you do for coal or anything else. You make sure that there's no pollution going up the stack. So that works. One thing that is a big scam, in my opinion, is pyrolysis. And that's where there's a lot of companies, again, charging hundreds of millions of dollars, making big plants and huge claims. And that's where you take a solid polymer, you put it through a heat treatment, and you end up with oil afterwards. Say, look at that. We made oil out of plastic. It's like, yeah, but that's the same as taking $1 bill and changing it into 4 quarters in American money, right? So you take a dollar bill, and you change it into, you change it, but they only give you 3/4 back, right? It's like changing $1 into 75 cents. So you start off with 100% solid fuel, which is the plastic, and you convert it to 75% of liquid fuel because you wasted the rest of it doing the transformation. That's just total nonsense. And if you look at the life cycle studies of it, it's not green. It doesn't help the environment, but it's another smoke and mirrors things that some people are getting rich from.
Wonderful. I think I knew we were going to go a bit over, which is good because we had a lot to talk about. But I do want to ask the question that I asked, and I think I might know the answer, but I want to understand, out of all of this, you've mentioned a couple of times that everything you do with regards to this research is unpaid, but you do continue to do it. I want to understand what's your least favorite part of working on this and your favorite part of working on this.
Wow.
In any order.
My least favorite part is that people who pretend to care, they're just virtue signaling. So if I look on social media, of all the people who claim to passionately care about the environment, many of them are just complete charlatans. They will not look at evidence. They do not care. They're only pretending to be against plastic because that's what they're sheep and that's what makes them look good to their friends. They don't give a monkeys about the environment. They're not prepared to check any of the things that they believe, not prepared to do, as you said, read something and change your mind. They're just faking it because it makes them feel good and look good to their friends. They swing their cotton bag above their head that's 200 times worse for the environment and feel like an angel. That drives me mad. It drives me mad that many of these environmental groups, as the former president, here's his book. Former president of Greenpeace left and said they're just a bunch of charlatans who tell lies for donations. That's what he says in his own books. So it drives me mad that these so-called environmental groups have sold out and now just tell us whoppers for donations. I think that's shocking and should be acted upon.
Yeah. And what's your favorite part?
My favorite part is when somebody actually does read the evidence and says, oh yeah, I see what you mean. This all checks out. They bother to check. And when I quote something, I quote it verbatim. I copy and paste from the study, word for word, what the author said. I give people links, hundreds and hundreds of links so they can go and check it themselves. Nobody's ever found anything that didn't check out. So it does make me happy when 1% of the population actually does care and does check it out and find out that the truth is the truth. It stands for itself.
Yeah, you have to apply the scientific method, and I think there's an argument that says you have to question everything and trust no one. And I think that argument holds water, but I also think you have to include yourself in that argument, which is if you don't trust yourself either. And I know that sounds like counterintuitive, but be open to changing your mind. And if you feel passionately about something and you want to put that energy out into the universe, it's on you to go and find things that are contradictory to what you believe so that you have a higher degree of confidence in your own position, whatever that position is. That if you're not willing to do it in any context, that's on you.
That exactly mirrors what I've seen. I've seen that the people with the most passion are doing the most harm because they didn't check the facts before they went off. They're like an unguided missile. They've got a big warhead, but no guidance system. So they just go out and wreck everything. So it would be nice if the people who care the most and really are passionate would double check their figures and their facts before they go off and make things worse.
Yeah, beautiful. Chris, I think we'll leave it there for today. We're going to be leaving a bunch of links, and those links then allow people to go and have a lot more of a read. I've actually just got a copy of your book, so I'm going to have a read of it myself. I'm obviously super curious about anything that contradicts my own perspective on things, especially when I can go all the way down to the source material. So, look, I really appreciate you coming on the show today and talking to us about all this, and let's see how this changes people's minds or not.
Send me any questions you have. I'd be happy to answer them. And we've done a swap. It was dark where you are, and now it's dark where I am. So there's a time difference for you.
I know. I was thinking that before. I was thinking it's actually there's no sun at all. It's perfectly cloudy because it's the middle of winter and I live in the Blue Mountains. But my day is upon me and I will go and seize my day. You should enjoy your Friday night.
Excellent. Cheers, Vince. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Talk soon.
Cool. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.